Hello, welcome to Can't Make This Up, a history podcast where I interview historians about their latest research covering a whole range of topics from all time periods. I am your host, Kevin. Today I'm going to be speaking with a historical novelist named Kim Taylor Blakemore. We're going to be talking about her most recent book, perfectly in time with Halloween here, called The Deception. This is the latest installment in her Dangerous Women series. And this book focuses on some interesting women from the spiritualist movement. The spiritualist movement is a movement from the mid and late 19th century in which women were claiming that they could communicate with the dead. Some very much believed in the phenomenon, in the supernatural elements of it. Some were outright fraudsters and con artists. It's a fantastic, interesting little piece of American religious and spiritual history. So Kim's going to join us to talk about her novel and to talk about a little bit of the research she did into the spiritualist movement. If you find that this book interests you and you want to read the novel, there is a link for it down in the description of this episode in your podcast app. And then, of course, if you would like to follow along with the podcast, you can, of course, like and subscribe on whatever you're listening to. Please rate and leave a review. Those things are super helpful in getting the word out about the podcast. And then also, if you want to follow me on social media, I'm at CMTU History on any platform that's out there. All right, I hope that you'll enjoy this conversation about The Deception.
The You Can't Make This Up History Podcast, bringing you strange but true things from the past. It's not the average history that you learned in school. We're bringing you the heroes and bringing you the fools, and stories that are just too crazy to believe. The stranger than fiction and super unique.
Welcome to Can't Make This Up. My guest today is Kim Taylor Blakemore. Kim, how are you?
I'm excellent and happy to be here.
Very glad to have you. If you would mind telling us a little bit about yourself and how you became a professional novelist.
Sure. I live in the Pacific Northwest, in a small town out here. I used to live in Portland, so it's been a big change to move out here, and have quite the menagerie of dogs and cats, which is very fun. I do like that. You can't go wrong every day with animals, right? They keep you laughing, and mine do every single day. So
I've got a golden doodle named Echo that makes me laugh every day.
you have the best dog. Golden doodles are like literally the crown kings and queens of clownishness.
They're just born happy.
I know. They're like got this big smile all the time, and they have that fur you just like have to like dig into and be like, you're the cutest thing in the whole world. So you are quite lucky that way. We just got a little puppy who's part Jack Russell and part who knows what. And I forgot what it was like to have a terrier puppy where they think, they know everything in the world. And you don't, and they do not understand the word no or what that means. So that's pretty fun. And they all come into my office and hang out and sleep while I write, which is very fun. And then they all get up exactly the same time at 4:30 and stare at me for dinner. So that's very fun.
So you have a team of co-authors on this book.
I do. These are all co-authors. So in terms of, if we got back to the writing part and away from the dog part, I had actually started writing years ago. I had done 2 YA books, Sissy Funk and Bowery Girl, and then I didn't know what to do because I didn't want to continue writing in YA. And then life sort of happened and I became a dean at a business college, and that took a lot of time. And during that whole time, I just started working on figuring out what I wanted to write next. And so I taught and facilitated workshops for a group in Portland called PDX Writers. and continued to figure out the stories I wanted to tell. And I ended up writing The Companion, which is sort of the first in this series of 3 books. The Deception that's coming out is the 3rd one. All set in New England in the between 1850 and 1870. So that was, I was writing that, and it was fairly gothic book, and I didn't have an agent. I wasn't thinking of that at the time. I was just trying to get a book done. And like halfway through it, I realized it was a pretty commercial book. So I chose to change track a little bit and say, you know what, finish the book and look for an agent. So I did that. I was successful in that, very lucky. And we sold the book to Lake Union Publishing, and then they have subsequently published that after Alice Fell and The Companion. And it's been very fun because New England is such a great area for like every religious movement, every movement you could possibly want in the US. So the suffragettes were there, the suffragists, the abolitionists came from there, the transcendentalists were in there, the Great Awakening 1 and 2, which were the big, huge religious revivals, came from there. And as did spiritualism, which is what The Deception is talks about a little bit within it. So that was very fun to write.
All right. So with the book coming out this Halloween season, The Deception, if you could give us kind of your quick couple-minute pitch on what this novel is about.
So The Deception is about a woman named Maud Price, who used to be a child medium, and she has subsequently lost her fame, lost her reputation, and lost her spirit guide that was very successful for her as a child. And she's struggling to make ends meet. And she is given the name of a woman who can help her regain all those things, her guide, her reputation, and her fame. And that woman is Clementine Watkins, and she happens to be a very talented fixer of mediums and medium seance problems.
That's a great name for a character, by the way.
Thank you. So she does hire this woman and finds herself suddenly far, far, far too much in trouble with the frauds that are committed in her name to regain her reputation. So it is the story of frauds and mediums. And, you know, I think at the basis of this book, I always thought, I love watching those, like the mediums on TV, etc. And some of them you're like, wow, you're really good. You're a good con artist. You're good at, reading the crowd. You can do that sort of hot read of what's going on in the crowd, very quick on their feet. And other ones I question. I'm like, maybe they're really, really mediums. And in the end, is the comfort any different whether they are or not? If you believe it, right? If you believe in the other world, is the comfort any different, whether it's authentic or been done with tricks? And I think that sort of drives part of this story. At least it drives Clementine's moral compass herself, if she has one.
So this topic of spiritualism, what made you decide to write a book on this?
When I was trying to determine the book that I wanted to do next in the series, so The Companions in 1855, After Alice Fell is in 1865. Again, they're in the same town in New Hampshire. So I said, I want to move up about 10 years to see what happens to the town. And I just started looking at the sorts of, again, the movements that were in New England. And spiritualism was very, very big. And I happened across a book on the Fox sisters, who were basically in America, the beginning of the spiritualist movement. And these two girls
I bet I've read that same book that you're talking about.
Oh yeah, oh
Okay.
yeah, the raps and taps, right?
Yeah.
So these girls, they just, they start making all these raps and tap sounds in their house. Their mother believes them. They say it's a guy that's been murdered in the basement. This is like 1844. Uh, People are coming over to the house, like, what's going on here? They're like, we don't know. We're scared. There's this split foot. That's what they called the guy that goes to the basement, Mr. Splitfoot. So they started doing this, and their mother's like, this is getting ridiculous. I'm shipping you off to your sister. So they go to another town. This is in New York, upstate New York. And they go to another town with their sister, and their sister doesn't say this is ridiculous. Their sister says this is an amazing money-making opportunity. So she starts really publicizing the two of them, and they become world famous doing raps and taps. People from the audience ask questions, and it's yes or no answers. And from them, just everything burgeoned. So you start getting sort of a split in the spiritualist movement. You have the people who are absolutely 100% believe they can get in touch with spirits in the other world or the great beyond or Summerland. Hundreds of newspapers are being produced at this time that are spiritist or spiritualist newspapers. And that alone became its own movement of people trying to connect with loved ones, connect with dead famous people. In the back of one of them, in the back of one of the newspapers, they had literally like a Dear Abby section, but it was people who wrote in from the other world through a medium to the paper, saying why they died, what's going on with them now. Please say hi to my mother. Please tell my brother the money is under this cabinet. I've been murdered, etc. So you have, the authentic spiritualists who said, listen, we believe in this and we believe in the afterlife and communicating with them. And you have the mediums that start growing from that. So you start having the business of that. And most mediums were women at the time. There were some famous male mediums. The Davenport brothers, for instance, were very, very famous. And then from that, of course, as in any of these types of businesses, you have the people who say, how can I make money from this and recreate the seance? And then from there, you have magic. Magic was already there, but it connected very quickly with the spiritualist movement. And there was interesting offshoots of it. So there were the cable that was going to carry telegraphs between the United States and England was being put in through the Atlantic. And one of the men who did that also believed in mesmeric fluids as a way to talk to spirits. So he said, look, we can send these signals over the telegraph. Why can't we do the same sort of idea to connect with ghosts and spirits? And then you had spirit photography became very popular, and that was a guy named William Mumler was the biggest one. He was the one who photographed Mrs. Lincoln with a ghost of Abraham standing right behind her. And he was hauled in front of Congress for that.
And I
his,
encourage anybody listening, go look it up on Google. You can see this picture of Mary Todd Lincoln with kind of Abraham hovering in the background.
Yes, and I suggest stay on Google past that one and keep looking at spirit photography because some of them are really well done. And it's really a fascinating thing. But if you think about it in terms of the history of the time, now the deception takes place in 1877, so we are past the Civil War. But it was during the Civil War that spiritualism really burgeoned when there were so many deaths in families and so many people yearning to talk to the men who fell on the battlefield. And that's where it really, really grew big. So that in the book, that Maud would have been very famous right during that time as a child medium. And her father would cart her around everywhere. There were mediums who carted themselves to battlefields so that they could talk to the recently dead. So, we gets a little nutty within there. So then
Right. I
after
mean,
that
you kind
1870,
of want to think
yeah,
about the ethics of that, right? I mean, that just
yeah,
is unsettling to think.
yes, yes, it's very unsettling, and those ethics are, yes, that I can't even describe that kind of ethics. I'm just going to get on my cart and let's go over and let's talk to them now. Well, they're recently bereaved, but if you think of that, that is the moment so these people who do this, whether they are true mediums or not. And again, I've always called myself a skeptical believer, because I myself have seen ghosts, and I've talked to some mediums, especially for this book that I interviewed,
Mhm.
that has been pretty interesting. But during the Civil War, this movement gets very big, and we are in the space between sort of right past the Civil War up to Houdini, where you really have that, people, they're going on stage, they're doing world tours, they're going house to house and doing different sorts of seances, and people will gather their friends in the parlor, and the medium and their assistants, because you better have assistants with you, bring the spirit cabinet in, bring the things to make the wall, that cover the windows, um, and they do their game, their act, as it may be. And then Houdini, this is past the book, but he's pretty interesting. When his mother died, he really wanted to connect with her, so he just went from medium to medium to medium to see if they could. And as he's doing this, it's Houdini, right? So he's already doing these sorts of illusions and tricks, and he's watching what they do, and he starts realizing, I know what the tricks are. So he would start going on stage and saying, this medium over here that I went to see, this is exactly how she did it. And he sort of blew open that the fraud part of the business.
Uh, so today he'd be considered a debunker.
He's a debunker. Yeah.
Yeah.
He was the most famous debunker. My favorite word. I love that word. The debunker. Yeah, and he was always like at odds with Arthur Conan Doyle, who wrote Sherlock Holmes, of course, who was very much into the spiritualist movement. So they had years of being at odds with each other, but still managing to speak together.
Mhm.
Yeah, so it's a fascinating period in terms of that, and in terms of, some things I found interesting about the spiritual movement itself was it was not like a church. So there wasn't ever um, sort of that, here's our priest at the top and then the people underneath, and these sort of layers to a church. It was very decentralized, and that was on purpose. But because it was decentralized, it couldn't stay together. So it's sort of like everything sort of started to fade out and the groups faded out. Although you can still go to a spiritualist college now, if you wish.
That's kind of how the paranormal community is today. There's not really
Hmm.
any definition to it.
Hmm. Yeah, agreed. I had a really interesting interview with a medium who was recommended to me, and it was fascinating to talk to her. But she said there's a lot of frauds in this, and she's part of a group that is wanting anyone who says they're a medium or psychic, that they have to prove they are through some physical way. So they want to certify them so that they can start debunking things and getting people to stop spending their money on, you know, all the frauds, which I found really interesting.
Well, that is
She,
interesting because most of your professions, that's how you end up with professional licensing associations.
uh-huh,
They want to weed
yeah,
out fraudsters, and we did this with doctors, we did this with dentistry, all kinds of things, lawyers.
yeah, exactly. And I think it would be interesting because you can fake so much now and you could find so much on the internet about people before you even meet with them for a reading. So it's like, what would you possibly get that proves that they didn't find that somehow in a quick search of the person?
Hmm.
So, you know, so I did the interview with her, which was really interesting because I wanted with Maud to, she's a really truly a medium. She, I didn't want to be like, here's the Hollywood version and there's scary ghosts and she has a trance and whatever. I really wanted to dig into some of the ways mediums see spirits. So Maud in the story hears spirits. She's clairaudient. And that's what she mostly does. And she's asked about it at one time, and she's, what's it like when they come? And she said it's like having a French horn put to your ear and every note blown at once. So that's what she, so that's how she does. Very few, a few times she sees spirits. So I was asking the medium I interviewed about this, and this is sort of how I've set this character up. And she said, well, there's so many different ways that you can experience and communicate with spirits. Sometimes it's just in your head, um and say, I can hear it in my head. And she said, yes, that's actually true. That is one way to communicate with spirits. I had a reading with her after the interview because I wanted to do that too. And she started right up front. She said, okay, I know we're going to continue on in this reading, but I see very, very clearly right now a young girl who's just, her dress is soaked in water and there's mud coming down out of her hair and she's got this horrific look on her face. And I said, that's one of the characters in my book. And she wouldn't have known that because no, I don't share my book until I'm done with anyone.
Hmm.
So I was like, that's like one of the characters. And she said she can see characters when she does readings with authors, which was, and another medium I went
Interesting. And,
to
and
when
you
I
hadn't
was
submitted
doing,
this yet.
no, I was still writing it. No one knew anything about the book,
Hmm.
this character particularly. So it was a young girl, and I was shocked. I'm like, how could you possibly know that? Did you get into my computer and read my novel? I was like halfway done with the book. And as I said, I don't share it until I have one person I send it to for an edit before I send it out to the publisher. So I'm like, okay, that's creepy. That was really weird. It wasn't creepy, it was cool. It was actually a great reading. But I have to wait about 2 years to see if some of the stuff she said actually happens. Yeah, and she talked to my grandmother and about my brother who passed away, who I don't know how she could have found out about, but maybe they know. So I really, really respected her, and I was really glad to have that. It's so easy to be cynical and go, it's all just smoke and mirrors.
Hmm.
But then, so it was really, really fascinating to talk to her. And I talked to a few other mediums, so I said, you were smoke and mirrors, but she felt like the real deal to me.
Okay.
So yeah. Hmm.
Um, so your two protagonists for your book, Maud and Clementine, they're both women.
Mhm.
What did the spiritualist movement do for women at the time? I find that really interesting.
So people felt that spirits came through women and women's softer qualities much easier than they did through men. So women started becoming the majority of the psychics and mediums at the time period, and it gave another means of making money and being independent as a woman on your own. Um, And yeah, so that at the time, as you know, there was not too many options of positions you could have if you needed to be independent, if you were not married. Excuse me. Yes, if you were not married. So if you were a widow, for instance, very difficult to make it. And this was a method to do it. All you needed was the parlor. You needed to be, uh, fairly good at what you were doing, whether it was the right way or the wrong way, and you were off.
Yeah, I think it's a interesting way for women to kind of get outside of social conventions at the time.
They also, and you bring up social conventions, which is great because it also gave women a voice in a very interesting way. Because it was outside of social conventions, if you had someone who had the spirits come through their body and speak to them, there was oftentimes that spirit that came through them had their own voice, and they would be very political, very much about what's going on with women's rights and women's right to vote, or they'd be very flirty. They'd be just absolutely not what you're supposed to be as a woman in the time period. So it gave this tremendous freedom to sort of for that medium to just speak their mind.
So the spirits would come through and advocate for women's suffrage or something like
Yes, exactly. And then they'd be like, no, no, that wasn't me. That
that.
was Mary, Mary Abbott, who died in Connecticut in 1720. She came through me and said this, not me. Give me my money, please. So yeah, I mean, people had the craziest sorts of spirits that came that they couldn't possibly know. They'd be like some Indian tribe from Brazil. They would, so that you can't prove it, right? They'd
Mhm.
be like, I'm a little child who was killed in the Amazon, but I'm here to see you. I love you all. It's like, well, how do you speak English? But it was, it's like people believed it. And when you're grieving and mourning and you're looking for, is there another world beyond this? You're pretty open to it.
So that kind of leads me into my kind of last question for your book is, kind of the characters that they're interacting with. To what extent do people believe this?
That's a good question. I would ask. I don't have any data on how much people believe this. And you hear it now, people will be like, oh yeah, I talk to my dad, or I see him, or when I see a dime, it's my dad leaving it for me. It's this sense we don't want to let go of them in some way. And I think that's very beautiful that we keep those connections.
Hmm.
And the spiritualist movement itself, there is still a very small faction of people, but I think a lot of people, and the fact that when a medium comes on TV and they do something, they're very popular. So we are still reaching for that. Can we get beyond the veil? What's out there?
Well, Kim, very much. I really like this. I think it's a really cool topic. I like that you really grounded it in the history of this movement, as opposed to, like you said, going for the very Hollywood horror film style. I think this was a really cool idea for a book and very well done. So, if somebody would like to pick up a copy of The Deception, where can they go?
Well, you can go to your bookstore, you can go on Amazon, you can go directly to my site at kimtaylorblakemore.com. Any of those places would be great. It comes out on September 27th, but it is in pre-order right now. And if you pick it up and you write me and show me your little receipt, I will send you one of those very cool tarot cards.
Oh, yes. We were talking about that before we
Yeah.
started recording. Tell people about the tarot cards.
Yeah, so instead of giving a book plate or a bookmark, I had a sort of, it's like a bookmark, but it's the shape of the tarot card, and it's this beautiful sort of creepy design that's very, very fun, and I think goes with the book. And I will send that to you if you send me your receipt that you got the book.
And Kim was nice enough to send me one. They're very cool. I really like it as a bookmark.
It's hard to describe them on a podcast, isn't it? Let's see. There's two hands. One woman has holding the dagger, another has a rose growing through her hand.
I will.
like...
I'll post the picture of mine on Twitter if that's all right. If people want to check that out.
Oh, that's cool. Yes, of course. That's
Okay.
great.
Last question for you. Is there any hints you can give us for what you're working on down the road?
Sure. I have a book that I'm just finishing up that's called The Good Time Girls. It's set in 1905 Kansas, and it's about two ex-dance hall girls on a road trip of vengeance. And that should be out in May. And I'm researching another historical thriller about resistance in Germany during Hitler's.
Great. You got some excellent projects in the hopper, it looks like. All right. Well, maybe we'll have you on again then.
I would love it.
All right. Well, Kim, thank you so much for joining us today.
Kevin, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Hi, welcome back. I hope that you enjoyed my conversation with Kim about her latest novel. Of course, if you want to pick up a copy of it, there's a link for it down in the description of this episode. It's a fun period to take a look at, so I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. Looking ahead, October suddenly became quite busy. Got to speak with author from the intelligence community, Nicholas Reynolds. We're going to be talking about his book, Need to Know. Look for that in a couple weeks. And then I'm very excited to talk about a book that kind of appeared on my radar suddenly here in October, but I'm super excited for it. Over My Dead Body, Unearthing the Hidden History of America's Cemeteries. So look for that before Halloween, and I'll be speaking with the author, Greg Melville. A couple other things to look forward a little bit later on. Doing a book about Civil War, and then looking at another book for November, looking at the reign of Pharaoh Akhenaten and Nefertiti. So that'll be a lot of fun. We've never done anything on Egypt before, so I'm looking forward to that. So lots of things coming around the bend. So until then, see you next time.